Nidre, all our vows, all of them. All the different types too, the vows, the resolves, the commitments, promises to abstain, promises to dedicate ourselves to something. All the different ways that we swear ourselves to others, to God, they don't matter. We can't promise our good behavior for another year. We're so fallible that we ask for all of our promises and vows to be canceled in advance. We simply cannot escape the human condition far enough to ensure that our oaths and resolves are successfully kept. That's basically what we just said. But aren't we lying to ourselves? Or at least telling ourselves a lie of omission? We might be willing to say tonight that our vows are not vows, and that they may as well be null and void now, but won't we be incredibly disappointed in ourselves when we end up not following through on a promise? Won't we reprimand those who fail to keep their vows to us, even though we just said that they're all null and void? From this Yom Kippur to the next, null and void. What are we supposed to do with this? If our vows are null and void, why bother making any in the first place? Tell me if you've ever heard this line before. Never make a promise you can't keep, and don't say anything you don't mean. Generally speaking, this seems like a fine policy. Many of us strive to hold ourselves to it all throughout the year. We work hard not to overextend ourselves, not to do anything that we wouldn't ultimately stand behind. And yet we allow ourselves to break it all the time. The husband who's lost in the football game and totally misses his partner telling him about the wonderful conversation she had with his mother earlier that day, and then when reprimanded, promises to listen better in the future, but then in the third quarter, makes the same mistake right over again. The teenager that promises they'll never lie to their parents again when they bring home that slip from their teacher that says they're failing trigonometry and it needs to be signed by their parents and they didn't tell them how bad they were doing. But then a month later, they go to their friend's house while their parents are away for a party, but they assure mom and dad, no, their parents will be there the whole time. These are not uncommon stories. I didn't read them in some fantasy novel. They happen all the time. In fact, they happened in my life, except I wasn't a husband yet, right? And I was a boyfriend. It wasn't trigonometry, it happened to be chemistry. I'm really bad at chemistry. I wanted to be a doctor at one point, actually. Not so anymore. We know that our promises, sometimes, some of them, aren't genuine, but we make them anyway. I think it's because it makes us feel good. We want to be people who can be depended on. It's human nature. We want to support those we care about and feel supported. When we say we promise, we feel proud of ourselves. I promise you, I'll love you and care for you the rest of my life. I'll do better next time, Dad, I promise. I swear the diet starts tomorrow, and this time, and I promise you this, I'm going to make it past the first week. There's a certain, I don't know what the right word is exactly, joy or contentment in resolving to do something. This is because, whether we deserve it or not, we trust ourselves. We assume that when the circumstances arise that we either have to choose to keep or break that vow, that we'll be able to be our best selves. Now, that's a big assumption. Maybe I'm being cynical, but it seems to me that we cannot with any assuredness guarantee that in those make or break moments, we'll be able to act as our best selves. Doing so in normal circumstances is difficult, and so the thought of promising to always succeed in something like that might seem asinine to us. Abraham Lincoln himself once said, "We must not promise what we ought not, lest we be called on to perform what we cannot." Now, if I've depressed anyone up to this point, I'm sorry. I might have painted a picture of promising, which is overly skeptical or pessimistic. My outlook is not so bleak, however, that I can end the sermon there. I would not and cannot stand before you and tell you not to make promises, and certainly not standing in front of the person who I've promised my whole life to. By the way, if you haven't met Marnie yet, she's great. She's my fiance. Wonderful, wonderful lady. Worth meeting. On August 6th, at Camp Harlem, in front of a whole lot of people, sorry about that, I made a promise to Marnie to love her always, come rain or come shine. I put a ring on her finger and engaged her in a promise bound up in love and warm feelings. I'm a very lucky man. I have a person in my life that makes me feel confident in making such a sweeping promise. That said, and you can ask Marnie this and she'll confirm it, there are plenty of times that we've made promises to each other before in our relationship that haven't been kept. And there will be, I'm sure of it, times in the future where we let each other down. But even knowing all this, I made the promise anyway. I think that I was willing to make a promise like that for precisely the same reason that I said before, but allow me to put a bit of a more positive spin on the line. I said before that we often make promises that we may be sure we can't keep fully, just because it feels good to resolve something. Because the feeling we get when we vow ourselves to do something or make a promise to someone makes us feel good about ourselves. But shouldn't it? What we are doing when we make promises like that is not simply self-gratification, it's self-pursuit. Through making promises to be better listeners and be more responsible and be better wives and children and husbands and partners and friends and coworkers, we are in fact aspiring to a version of ourselves in which we are indeed those people. Nedarim, vows, like these, direct our lives. They open a door in our imagination to reveal a path on which we can walk, and on which the destination is a moment in time in which all those feelings of pride and self-assuredness we felt when we made the promise in the first place are all justified. French-Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote about how the other person is truly a mystery to us, that each person is a whole world, and thus we can never truly know what's happening within them, only the tiny percentage that they let us see. This is why it's so painful when we break a promise with someone. The feelings of shame or guilt that we feel when we look in their eyes might be partially attributed to their disappointment in us, but really, we can never truly know how they're feeling. Our guilt and shame is a result of us not reaching the standards we set for ourselves. We know intimately about our own mistakes, our own decisions to stray from that right path. And so we beat ourselves up, knowing that there's no one else to blame. Walking that path seems, at least to me, to be the goal of all of our lives. We're all walking down a myriad of different pathways all at the same time. Promises to our families, to ourselves, to our friends, to God even. And all of these paths are different yellow-bricked roads to Oz. But what we're dealing with here is nothing so fantastic as an Emerald City. If our Oz is our best self, then it seems to me that the yellow brick road is a path worth setting out on. Even if the odds against us actually reaching that destination are astronomical. But understanding the destination is only the very first part of all of this. It can be done in less than a day, looking at oneself in the mirror, figuratively or perhaps literally, as well, and deciding what we want to be better at, what we want to improve upon. If our Oz is the best version of ourselves, then the yellow brick road, the path we all must walk to get to that destination, is teshuvah. The work we're doing during these days especially, but that we ought to be doing throughout the year, is the work of teshuvah, repentance, earning forgiveness for our wrongdoings, and trying to return shuv to our best selves. We are all like Dorothy during these 10 days. We set out on a path that's uncertain, walking that path alongside friends who are also looking to better themselves, each one searching for something a little different. Each step we take bringing us closer to a return. Dorothy was trying to return home, but not to Kansas. The line isn't click your heels together 3 times and say there's no place like rural Kansas. Dorothy was imagining an idealized version of her home and what made her who she was. This is what we've been walking toward these 10 days. This is the path that we're nearing the end of for this year. If we all accept this, if we all choose to buy what I just said, then a new understanding of the mission of a service like Kol Nidre becomes clearer. We've come to Kol Nidre not to absolve ourselves of failures in promise keeping, and not to decide that vows and promises are overrated. We've come instead to acknowledge that even for all our hard work, we might not reach Oz in the next year. And certainly we're not there yet. We say that our promises are null and void with the understanding that what those promises represent is an idealized version of the kind of person we want to be, and that that person might never fully manifest itself in this world. We admit these things, but we also remember that it's not the destination, but the journey toward it which shapes us. We realize that we'll still make promises over the coming year and strive to keep those we've made in years past, because the reward for doing so substantially outweighs the risk of failure. We'll falter, yes. And when we do, we'll ask for forgiveness, but we will also succeed. And when we do, we'll feel refreshed and happier with the person that we see in the mirror. Over the course of this Yom Kippur, and for the rest of the year, may we keep our feet squarely on the yellow brick road of teshuvah. And may it be God's will that we return to our best selves and reach Oz. There's no place like home. We'll continue with